He stood alone in full dress blues while the parade marched past like he was never there. One boy's question, "Why isn't that soldier marching?" changed everything the internet saw. The next day, 300 strangers marched down his street, flags, boots, and silent gratitude. He waved from his porch, surrounded by poppies, photos, and a plaque that read, "Every hero deserves a parade." His cap sat on a chair beside his grave. A sign read, "He stood alone, so others never have to." Frank Delaney had stopped expecting much from Veterans Day. The 82-year-old retired Marine had grown used to being invisible, especially in a town that had gotten younger, faster, and busier with each passing year. But every November, he still polished his old service boots, pressed his faded USMC dress blues, and walked alone to the corner of Main and Patterson, where the town's annual parade would pass. He didn't carry a sign, didn't wave a flag, just stood quietly, hands behind his back, watching. Frank hadn't been invited to march in years. No one had asked for his name, his unit, or his story. Younger veterans led the parade now, newer wars, newer uniforms. He understood. Time moved on. So did people. That morning, he had asked his neighbor if the parade route had changed. "I think it starts at City Hall now," she'd replied distractedly, not looking up from her phone. So Frank walked downtown, took his spot near the lamppost outside the bakery, and waited. Around him, children clutched mini flags, parents set up lawn chairs, and music from the high school band echoed down the street. The excitement was everywhere, except near Frank. A few people glanced at him in passing, maybe noting the medals still pinned to his jacket or the tightness in his stance. But no one stopped. No one said thank you. No one even asked his name. When the parade began, Frank straightened his shoulders. Marines don't slouch, he reminded himself, not even when forgotten. He watched the floats, the honor guards, and even the local politicians wave as they rolled by. But in all the cheers, all the patriotic music, and all the flags fluttering in the wind, no one looked at the old man in uniform standing alone. And Frank, though proud, felt something crack quietly inside his chest. As the last float passed and the crowds began to cheer and clap, Frank remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward, shoulders squared like he was still standing at attention. His medals caught the sunlight, but drew no notice. The sound of drums faded into the distance, replaced by the rustling of folding chairs and strollers. Then, from a few feet away, came the innocent voice of a child. "Mom," a boy asked, tugging at his mother's sleeve, "why isn't that soldier marching?" Frank turned slightly, not expecting the moment to mean anything. The boy, maybe 6 or 7, pointed directly at him. The mother hesitated. I don't know, sweetheart." Frank smiled faintly, gave the boy a soft nod, then turned back toward the emptying street. But someone nearby, a teenager with a camera, had heard the question. They snapped a photo of Frank standing there, alone, in his dress blues with the medals glinting just below his heart. That photo hit social media within minutes. "Not all heroes get invited," the caption read. "This Marine stood alone while the parade marched by. Anyone know his name?" The post spread like wildfire. Within hours, veterans groups picked it up, then local news stations, then people across the country. Comments poured in. "That's Frank Delaney. He served in Vietnam. My dad knew him." "This is heartbreaking. We owe him better." "Where's the respect?" By nightfall, someone had started a hashtag, #MarchForFrank. People began organizing, quietly at first, then with urgency. Former Marines messaged Army buddies. Firefighters called in favors. A local high school band volunteered to return. One veteran who had seen Frank's picture from 2 states away posted, "I'll drive 7 hours if it means marching beside him." Meanwhile, Frank sat alone in his living room, unaware of the digital storm forming around his quiet moment. He turned off the news like he always did, cleaned his medals with a soft cloth, and placed his cap on the kitchen table. He didn't know that by the next morning everything would change, because sometimes it only takes a question from a child to make the whole world stop and finally see what it's been missing. The next morning, Frank woke early out of habit. He always did on days that reminded him of the war, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, even random Tuesdays when the wind smelled like the jungle or a bird call matched the rhythm of a chopper blade. He shaved, pressed his shirt again, and made coffee. His medals, already gleaming, sat neatly in their places. It wasn't parade day anymore, but he wore his dress blues anyway. Because that's what Marines do. You show up with pride, even when no one's looking. Except someone was. Frank opened his front door to grab the newspaper and froze. Across the street, a young woman stood holding a sign that read, "Thank you for your service, Mr. Delaney." Behind her, 2 more people stepped onto the sidewalk. Then 5, then 10. Some were strangers, some were neighbors he hadn't seen in years. A man approached him gently. "Sir, we heard what happened yesterday." Frank blinked. What do you mean?" "You stood alone," the man said. "Not today." A distant hum broke the silence. Then it grew louder. The low rumble of drums, a brass section, bagpipes. Frank stepped out further, and what he saw stopped him cold. Coming down the street, not the city's main avenue but his own neighborhood, was a full parade, over 300 people, marching bands, local firefighters in full dress, police cruisers with lights blinking respectfully, dozens of veterans in uniform saluting as they walked. Children carried hand-drawn signs. For Frank, "A hero lives on our street. One man, one nation's gratitude." There were people holding photos of other veterans, some living, some not, and above them, banners with the simple phrase, "Every hero deserves a parade." Frank's knees nearly buckled. A woman gently placed a chair near him, but he shook his head. No, he would stand. He raised his hand in salute as the first row passed, a line of Marines, their boots in sync, eyes locked on his. One broke formation just long enough to step forward and embrace him. "Semper Fi, sir." Frank couldn't respond. His voice was gone, but his eyes, wet and wide, said everything. Behind the Marines came a small marching group of civilians carrying nothing but poppies and silence, a living memorial. Then came a young boy on his father's shoulders, the same one who had asked the question the day before. He waved a small flag and shouted, "You're our hero!" Frank smiled, lips trembling. The parade lasted 45 minutes, not long by city standards, but long enough to undo years of feeling forgotten. At the very end, the crowd parted to let one last marcher through, a lone bugler. He stopped in front of Frank, nodded, and played taps, soft, clear, and devastatingly beautiful. And in that moment, with sunlight pouring down and the street echoing the final note, Frank Delaney understood something he hadn't in decades. He hadn't been left behind. He had just been waiting for the world to catch up. In the days that followed, the small neighborhood street where Frank Delaney lived became more than just a row of quiet homes. It became a landmark of gratitude. People began showing up not to gawk, but to leave things. A boy left a crayon drawing of Frank saluting the Marines. Someone else placed a wreath of red, white, and blue poppies by his front step. There was even a folded note, unsigned, that simply read, "I never knew your name. I'll never forget it now. Local news picked up the story first, then state news, then national media. They called it the parade that marched back, and one man's stand that moved a nation. Veterans from all over the country began writing letters, some addressed to Frank by name, others to the Marine who waited with honor. He received patches from Army Rangers, a photo signed by a retired Navy admiral, and a message from a young soldier in basic training. Sir, when I feel like quitting, I think about how you stood alone in uniform when no one else remembered. I'm finishing this for you. Frank tried to answer every letter, but there were too many, so he did something simpler. Each morning he'd sit on his porch, wear his cap, and wave at every passing car. People began slowing down. Some rolled down their windows just to say thank you. Others stopped to shake his hand. The town's mayor visited unannounced one afternoon and presented him with a plaque. In honor of the parade you inspired. Frank accepted it humbly, but then made one request. No more parades for me, he said quietly. Do it for someone else next year. Someone still waiting. From that moment on, the town started a new tradition. Every Veterans Day, one elder from the community who had been overlooked was chosen as honor marcher. And every year, without fail, the parade took a brief detour, just long enough to pass by Frank Delaney's porch. He never asked for it, never expected it. But when the drums grew near and the crowd rounded the corner, Frank would rise from his chair, straighten his back, and salute. Because even when the world finally remembers you, you never forget how long it didn't. Years later, long after the news crews stopped coming and the photos faded in storefront windows, Frank Delaney remained a quiet fixture in town. He still sat on his porch most mornings, still wore his green cap with the Marine Corps emblem stitched faintly across the brim, and still nodded politely to every passerby. He never bragged, never repeated the story. But those who knew, really knew, carried it like a secret worth protecting. When Frank passed away at 89, there was no grand headline, just a handwritten note taped to the bakery window. The parade route is different this year. It leads to Frank. That day, the entire town marched once more, not with spectacle, but with reverence. People carried signs, not with slogans, but with names. Veterans forgotten, families healing, heroes overlooked. And as the procession reached the cemetery, a single chair sat beside Frank's resting place. On it rested his cap, and a sign that said, "He stood alone so others never have to, ever."